Welcome, everyone. Glad to have everyone for this month's Religion 101. We're really grateful. I'm James Light. I'm a member of the South Coast Interfaith Council Board of Directors and also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to host so many great speakers and interesting topics of all the different religions and faith communities in our South Bay and Long Beach area. Tonight, we're welcome to and grateful to welcome Tahil Sharma, and he is part of the United Religions Initiative and also has an appointment on the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. So I'm sure as part of his presentation, he'll talk about his work in interfaith and across different faiths and in the interfaith community. So that'll be great to hear. His topic tonight is both Hinduism and Sikhism. So I think this is probably the first time that we've actually had someone who has at least as far as a topic on Religion 101, an identity, a connection, participation in more than one religious community. So that'll be really fascinating to hear about. So again, we're really grateful to have Tahil with us tonight. This is our Religion 101s are recorded and are posted on our South Coast Interfaith Council YouTube channel. And so you can just search South Coast Interfaith Council on YouTube and it'll pop right up at the top. And there's all sorts of additional programming from all of the multiple of events and seminars and discussions and events that the South Coast Interfaith Council sponsors. And so there's lots of great material to see there in addition to our Religion 101 seminars. So I'm going to turn the time over to Tahil. Tahil will have you offer a prayer or meditation or any kind of thing you want as sort of a start. And when we're done with our seminar tonight as well, and in whatever manner that you would normally pray, and then we'll be grateful to hear from you. So thanks very much for being with us, Tahil.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you everyone that's here today and those of you that might be watching later. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been a big fan of the South Coast Interfaith Council and the work that Miliaji, Saraji, and many of you on the board of directors have been doing for all these years, and I'm very grateful to finally have an opportunity to, I guess, share some of my background and my experience in doing interfaith work as well as my interfaith identities. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'll start off with chanting a couple of mantras in Sanskrit dedicated to the divine feminine or the mother goddess that is sort of my patron deity in my practice of Hinduism. So if you all would like to close your eyes and bow your heads in prayer, reflection, meditation as you feel comfortable. Oh. Aim Hrim Klim Chamundaye Vichye Swaha. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Trambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Sharanagata Dinartha Paritrana Parayane सर्वस्यार्थि हरे देवी नारायणि नमोस्तुते सर्वस्वरूपे सर्वेशे सर्वशक्ति समन्विते भयेभ्यस्त्राहिनो देवी दुर्गे देवी नमोस्तुते कात्यायनाय विद्महे कन्याकुमारी धीमहि तन्नो दुर्गे प्रचोदयात् Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Adi Shakti Arpanamastu. Thank you all so much. Let me just make sure that I'm sharing my screen, and then we should be good to go. I want to welcome you all once again to my version of Religion 101, which is having an interfaith identity for Hinduism and Sikhism. I'm here as the regional coordinator for North America for the United Religions Initiative, which is the world's largest grassroots interfaith network and movement of interfaith organizers, community members who are dedicated to creating cultures of peace, justice, and healing. And I'm also here in my capacity as an interfaith minister in residence for the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, where I work directly with Bishop John Taylor, with the Canon for Common Life, Bob Williams, and the Ecumenical and Interfaith Programming Committee or group of the Episcopal Diocese. I'm going to start off my presentation today with a disclaimer. And the reason why I'm using a disclaimer is because oftentimes coming from Eastern traditions requires us an opportunity to think a bit more critically or assumingly about the traditions that do come from the East, especially ones that come from a dharmic background, ones that focus on the concept of dharma. And I want to invite people to think about this as an individual reflection and opportunity to learn from a singular individual who not only is an adherent of two Eastern religions, but who lives at the intersection of those religions. So I am very much speaking from my own individual experience, and it may share, a lot of the core values of what the two traditions offer separately, but I will say that I do have a unique practice of them at the intersection. So with that, I'm going to jump right in to the story of me and my parents. My parents moved to the United States in the late 1980s. My father's side of the family is Hindu on the left, and my mother's side of the family is Sikh, as you can see on the right. And two of these wonderful individuals created the wholesome me that I am. For those of you that know me, you can see that it's me in the middle because of my smile, and that seems to have retained itself over time. But I have to say that growing up at the intersection of these two religions has actually been a little more complicated than the mere idea of what Hinduism and Sikhism may be in practice when they have to be at an intersection. But not only that, I was born in the city of Los Angeles, one of the world's most religiously diverse cities that ever existed. And when you have so many communities surrounding you, that kind of hyperdiversity kind of drives you towards greater learning. It gives you an opportunity to look more appreciatively towards different religions, but also introspect more deeply about the traditions you might have grown up with. So I'm giving you all the little tidbit of what that looks like, and I'll be able to jump more into the intersection later. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is Hinduism. What is Hinduism is very hard to explain because Hinduism is not as simple as a simple form of theological mandates or ideas. It's not practiced in a singular way in a singular community. It is in no way a monolith. And like many others may describe their religions, it is very much a way of life rather than an organized religion. It is seen as one of the oldest traditions in the world. Things like mantras and yoga and the word Om all have an Hindu origin and context. And they share numerous texts like the Vedas, the Upanishads, most famously the Bhagavad Gita. And the list of religious texts actually goes on into the hundreds because it encompasses a concept that I'm going to explain in a couple of minutes. And what oftentimes is actually supposed to be the starting point of how people are supposed to understand Hinduism actually becomes a last minute thought because of some typical questions that come up about how many gods and goddesses do we have and why do we have so many? What is this system of social hierarchy that we call the caste system? And why do we view cows as sacred? A lot of those questions can sometimes be loaded. And it's very important to, not come into these spaces learning about these religions with the purview of assumption. It's very important to think about opening the door to your own mind in thinking about not filling the blank or trying to fulfill the answer because of a stereotype, and letting communities and individuals speak for themselves and their experiences. So in front of you, you will see several deities. All of these deities represent various aspects of what we consider Parbrahma, or the that which is beyond reality or beyond creation, our singular idea of a god or an almighty being or a supreme being, as we might consider. To your left, you will have the god Brahma, who is the god of creation. In the middle, you will have the god Vishnu, who is the god of sustenance. And on the right, you have the god Shiva or Mahesh, who is the god of destruction. And on the second painting, on your lower left, you will see the goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. On the lower right, you'll see the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. And at the top, seated upon a lion, you have the goddess Parvati or Durga, who is the goddess of power. Now you see these 6 deities. And interestingly, you may not know, but one of the gods on the left and one of the goddesses on the right is a consort to one another. So if you think a little critically about it, you can actually note where the connections are. For the god Brahma, if you need to create something, what is the most important thing to be able to create? Knowledge. So conveniently, his consort is Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. You need knowledge to create. The god Vishnu, who is his consort? Lakshmi. What do you need for sustenance? Wealth. And not just material wealth, but the wealth of ingenuity, the wealth of beauty, the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of victory, wealth in all of its different forms and understandings. And finally, the god Shiva. His power comes from the goddess of power, Shakti or Durga or Parvati, which allows him to be able to destroy things. And this ability to have creation and sustenance and destruction is a part of the circular concept of time that exists within Hinduism. There's an idea of impermanence that allows us to understand that nothing is eternal and that we are all a part of this process of creating and sustaining and destroying things in our material life and in reality overall. And that cannot be left out without understanding the role of the balance between the masculine and the feminine in all of creation. Oftentimes, Hindu spaces may not be able to educate about this significantly because this actually is a very central part to the function and theology of Hinduism. But oftentimes, because of patriarchal contexts and the way that certain interpretations don't permit for what is supposed to be the intrinsic value of equality between genders and gender concepts, people are not able to get that genuine understanding. Now you see here a gem. We can call it a diamond. I don't know how much it's worth. I don't even know if it's a diamond, but it's another stone nonetheless. And it's a stone with many facets. No one facet looks like the other, and no specific image of this stone will look the same if it's turned even a slight bit. And that actually is the way that we understand how the gods and goddesses play a role in Hinduism. The idea that we have a singular entity known as Parbrahma, or known by many other names, is actually based on an idea that that form of the divine is the one that is most convenient or connected to us. So as in the last photo, we described different deities for power and knowledge and wealth and sustenance and destruction and creation. Those are all aspects of a single deity. Those are all aspects of one almighty creator. And these different aspects are interpretations or our closest connotations to how we build a relationship with the divine, which is why they have unique looks Each of them has unique poses. Each of them has unique weapons or flowers or instruments to sort of represent the things that they hold close to them, because they're a part of the aspect of how we see the divine. So for many of us, this stone is a collection of all of those ideas of how we see the divine. The one that creates, sustains, and destroys, the source of knowledge, power, and wealth, and so many of the indescribable things of how we imagine the divine to be. Another example of this can actually be seen through the idea of picking up a spoon of sugar. When you look at a spoon of sugar, you'll see individual grains, each crystal having its unique construct and its presence within that spoon of sugar. But the minute you take that spoon and you mix it in a glass of water, all of those little crystals become a part of one entity. That's the idea of how we understand the plurality of the practice and the schools of philosophy and the ways that you practice Hinduism. One of the things that I'd like to share today, which will be for a couple of minutes, is the Gayatri Mantra. The Gayatri Mantra is considered one of the most important mantras, or basically a couplet of religious text that comes from the Rig Veda, which is considered one of the first religious texts or scriptures for the Hindu faith, that talks about this idea of the encompassing and ultimate value of what the divine is. The Gayatri is the goddess that you see on the right that is sort of supposed to be the manifestation of that mantra. And we'll take an opportunity in a couple of minutes to for you all to be able to watch the mantra and to be able to read its translation, but also to be in the presence of, you know, what is considered a very important aspect of Hinduism, which is jap. Jap is basically the chanting of scriptures and mantras to be able to focus on our relationship to the divine. The video is for a couple of minutes, so as you're in this space, please continue to be in reflection and thought, to think about questions you might already have, and we'll continue the presentation.
Tahil, before you play, I want you to stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
And then share it again. And when you're able to so you can select share screen again. And on the bottom, you want to click the buttons that say share video and share sound. And that way,
I had already
you already did it? Okay, sorry. Okay,
no.
I just wanted to make sure that you had it. So go ahead, just so we can make sure to hear the video. So you're obviously savvy about Zoom also, so thanks. Okay, cool.
No worries. I know it's definitely a process to make sure things go smoothly, so I'm there with you.
You're on mute.
I thought so. I knew I had done that to myself. For those of you that were listening to the mantra just now, you were reading on this idea that we are meditating on the Supreme, one who brings joy to us, one that holds all the power, and one that we hope strengthens our hearts and heightens our intellect. The idea of the existence of the divine is quite nuanced, because within the Hindu practice, there is, multiple ideas of how we understand the divine too. In multiple schools of philosophy, we understand the basic ideas of Brahman, the God or the ultimate soul that exists in all of creation, and the Atman, or the manifestation of that Brahman that exists in every single piece of creation, and that those things are inseparable. That practice, though, is actually a part of a significant majority, but not the general consensus of every Hindu belief. Several different types of Hinduism have an emphasis on specific deities who are seen as the supreme deity within all of the deities. You have the idea of the balance between Atman and Brahman, But you also have some that don't have a concept of an idea of a divine entity. There are actually secular and atheistic practices of Hinduism that allow people to be able to connect with nature and creation as a general concept, not associated with the divine entity. So we all have to keep in mind that the plethora of traditions within Hinduism are just as complicated based on each school of philosophy. Now I come to you with one of the more contentious aspects of Hinduism, which is understood to be the caste system. The idea of caste is a part of various societies, but the caste system within the Hindu context was started, in some form of writings about 2,000 years ago, when a sage known as Manu decided to create a system that allowed for people different guarantees of rights to be able to live within a society. So originally, the system was supposed to be very horizontally oriented. But unfortunately, because of um, things like patriarchy, conservative interpretation, power grabs, and the emphasis of colonialism in the last several centuries in particular, what was supposed to be a horizontal system became a very toxic vertical system. And it starts with the idea of which aspects of the divine that we're connected to, as you can see on the chart in front of you. To the left, you see the god Brahma, which is supposed to be sort of the idea of at what point do different communities represent that aspect of Brahma. So you have the Brahmins, who are considered of the priestly caste. You have the Kshatriyas, which are part of the warrior caste. You have the Vaishyas, who are part of the merchant or the artisan class, and you have the Shudras, which are supposed to be the class of folks that do the acts that are normally not done in society. Um, and this system, unfortunately, has also become a system of great violence and great privilege and great systemic inequality, which is why I entered this space with the candidness to say that I am an anti-caste Hindu. I do not believe in the idea that the system should exist because its historic precedence and its current existence is a detriment to what I believe are Hindu values, and more importantly, is a danger to the ability for Hindus to be able to practice Hinduism, because it actually goes against the idea of pluralism and nonviolence that is also inherent within the Hindu traditions. Most particularly, the people that are impacted by the system are Adivasis, which are a number of indigenous people of South Asia. And you have the Dalit communities, which are caste communities that were forced into this system to be a part of the indentured servitude and which led to enslavement of many people. That continues to be a part of the complicated system of caste in India. Because of this system, there is a higher chance when you are higher up on the caste that you have access and ownership to research and resources and opportunities. And the lower that you go, the chances that you are able to access those things does go down. And because of this predicament, systems like knowing which community of which caste you come from can be as narrowed down as looking at your last name. It can be assumed based on the color of your skin. So a colorism aspect does present itself in this. And unfortunately, it plays out in society, culture, and politics in a lot of different ways. But what people need to understand is a system like this is very hard to fully associate with Hinduism because it is not inherently part of the diasporic practice or the historical precedent of how Hinduism is supposed to be, which is continuously pluralistic, nonviolent, compassionate, and all of those things. But unfortunately, they are now, this system is now being seen as an inseparable part of Hinduism, and it is up to the Hindu diaspora itself to actually, come to the reckoning or to come to the uncomfortable conclusion of what this system is doing and how we can detach and deconstruct ourselves from it. Now I'm going to let everyone sort of take a deep breath. because that was just the nuance of a single religion. I know it's a lot, and please don't hesitate from writing or thinking about any questions. If something urgent comes up that you really want to ask because you don't want to forget, you're more than happy to put it in the chat. Or, we have plenty of time towards the end to make sure that I can go through everyone's questions. So we have our time together, so please don't worry about anything. The second religion that I'll be talking about is Sikhism. Different to the ancient practice of Hinduism, Sikhism is only several centuries old. It is one of the newer of the world's religions that was started by Guru Nanak in 1499, with the basic idea that you focus on being able to help the world in service, and that is how you practice your devotion. Guru Nanak was succeeded by 9 teachers or gurus that continued this message of universal love, humanity, and service, and was ended with the 11th guru, which was our scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib. Sikhism is often, misconstrued to be a denomination of Hinduism or Islam. It's often misconstrued to not be, correctly understood, because a lot of it is a very the appearance of being a Sikh is very outward rather than inward in practice. And it causes people to really, create a lot of misconceptions because of appearance about the community. So typical questions that come up are if you are Hindu or Muslim, and the answer is neither. The religion came out of, a time where Hindus and Muslims were in connection with each other. Many of the gurus were Hindus themselves. But over time, the creation of a unique religion came to be with influence from Hinduism and Islam to create what we now know as Sikhism. Questions like why do Sikh people wear a turban definitely come up. And it's a part of what is considered the understanding that every person is royal in the eyes of God, because historically a turban was the closest thing that people had to a crown, and crowns were actually only worn by those in royalty within the Mughal empires or the Hindu principalities. So this practice that was brought up by the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, said that every person is royal in the eyes of God, and therefore to show that we are recognized as people of service and people who are fighting for justice, we all should be dedicated in our baptismal process to be able to wear turbans. And questions come up about what makes Sikhism different from other Eastern religions that I'll get to in a couple minutes. I'm about to show you another video right now. This video is the first 2 lines of the 6 scriptures, which are known as the Guru Granth Sahib. This video doesn't have a translation, so I'll be providing a loose translation, which once we're finished watching. And again, I invite everyone to be able to sit in contemplation and see what this practice of Sikhism looks like in a sort of immersive way.
Hey, Church Choir. I have 3 albums coming out in April. They came out of my 28 days in the mountains of North.
So the text that you just heard are the first 2 lines, as I said, of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. The first term, Ik Onkar, which means one universal creator. Satnam, whose name means truth, whose name embodies truth. Karta Purak, the one who's seen as the creator. Nirbhau Nirvair, the one who is without fear or hatred towards creation. Akal Murat, the one that is omnipresent and omniscient in all things. Ajuni Sabhang, the one whose energy fulfills all of what is in creation. Guru Prasad, by which we learn from these gurus' grace. Jap, meditate on the name of God. Ad Sach, Jugad Sach, Hai bhi Sach, Nanak ho se bhi Sach. That God, that Ik Onkar, the universal creator, was true in the beginning, was true throughout the ages, is true now, and Guru Nanak says will forever be true. And the second line goes into the depths of those deeper questions that we ask. How is it that we have thousands of thoughts about what are our purposes, what is the point of our existence, that somehow we still can't seem to answer those questions? Um, how is it that we yearn for, the purpose to connect with the divine, yet we know that we're simply satisfied by the food that's being made right outside of our door? What's going to keep us, in check with and in tune with what is genuinely a part of this deeper yearning for salvation or liberation from this cycle of death and birth and death and rebirth? Um, and we are asked by Guru Nanak and we're asked by the Gurus to make sure that we follow a path of righteousness over everything else. So, what does that path of righteousness look like? In Sikhism, we have what are considered the 5 thieves of the soul. Those 5 thieves are ego, lust, anger, attachment, and greed. Those are the attributes that are supposedly taking away from our soul and our inability to connect with the divine that exists in all things. And then we have 5 values or 5 virtues that continue to help us inspire that connection with the divine, which are love, humility, compassion, contentment, and truth. And the 3 ways that in the Sikh tradition, we argue that we can achieve those 5 virtues is by doing 3 of the following things. Nam Japo, which means to chant the name of God on your lips, in your heart, and in your mind at all times. Kirat Karo, which means to live an honest, hardworking life. And Vandikeshako, which means at every time and at every opportunity to make sure that you help others who are in need. Those 3 pillars are then supported by the foundation of Simran and Seva, the 2 practices that are supposed to manifest everything that we're talking about here. Simran is very similar to the idea of jap in what I was explaining before on meditation. Simran is when you constantly are chanting the name of God, and Seva is another way of another word for service in Punjabi. So this idea of, these 2 really complicated religions comes together. And we think about this as a part of, one of many identities that we adhere to, because that's how we understand the institutions of religion to work. But a religious identity is more than just a worldview. It impacts the way you live in this world. And that's a very important thing to think about, because these identities impact the way that we understand ourselves and our purposes, how we understand the intersections of our other identities, and how we understand the decisions that we make in the world. So a religious identity for both a Hindu and a Sikh means a lot more than just being able to identify yourself. You're actually identifying the very reason why you can tread this world with your head on high. So what makes these religions similar? A lot, if I were to put it simply, because they both share a country of origin. They share a lot of similar cultural nuances and backgrounds. They share some similar beliefs, like this idea of having one divine entity. And they also have similar ways of being able to connect in terms of the practice of faith. There are oftentimes altars that you will find in Hindu temples of different gods and goddesses that are very ornate and intricate, filled with flowers and different smells of incense, and what is considered a very, sensory overload experience. Whereas in a Sikh temple, you will have the same idea, but there's a clash between the simplicity of the human world and the complexity of the altar where the Guru Granth Sahib, or the Sikh scriptures, sort of rests. It's seated on what is called a takht, which is the Arabic word that is translated later to a throne, where people go and prostrate to be able to pray to what we see as the ultimate guru, which is the scriptures. And some of the idea of prostration, some of the ideas of meditating on the name of God and stuff like that are shared between the traditions. And of course, food. obviously, if you're going to eat any kind of food that comes from India, you're going to have a great time. And especially from the two religions that, have a very heavy emphasis on what the value of food is to the communities, to the traditions themselves. In the Hindu tradition, there is a deep, deep reverence to food, um, manifested by the goddess of food, who is Devi Annapurna, who is a manifestation of the goddess Parvati. There are always prayers that are made, in the temples that you go to over the food that is offered as a blessed sort of sacrament that people take with them as they leave the temple. And that similar idea is done in the Sikh community as well, where whenever you go visit a Gurdwara, you will actually be fed twice. The first time you're fed is when you go in front of the altar, because you'll be given a sacred pudding, as we would sort of sum it up, which is known as prasad. This prasad is basically a mixture of ghee, sugar, water, and whole wheat flour. And they make it into this paste or this kind of a dessert that everyone feeds, which reminds you of the sweetness and the ecstasy that it means to be connected to the divine. And the second practice within Sikhism of the value of food comes with the concept of langar, or the free community kitchen that you will find in every Sikh temple around the world. The idea is very simple. If you are a person that has hunger, which is every single one of us, you are welcome to go to the temple and eat to your heart's content. No conditions, no questions asked. This practice was started by Guru Nanak and was manifested into an official part of the theology after a couple of gurus, recognized the value that the people that pray together should definitely eat together, and that the service of feeding people is one of the greatest things you can do. So it doesn't limit just Sikhs from being able to partake in the meal. The meals are always vegetarian, so it is accessible to every community or as many communities as possible. And one thing to really think about also is that both faith traditions not only have a root in the Indian subcontinent, but also happen to have significant majorities of their adherents or their practitioners still in South Asia today, mainly in India. Now, of course, because they both identify as completely different traditions, there is a lot that is different between them too. A whole lot of history really sets them apart. When you have what is estimated to be 4,000 to 6,000 years of history for Hinduism versus approximately a little over 500 for Sikhism, does give people the difference of context in how these religions came to be. With Hinduism, you don't necessarily have an origin story or a prophet or a divine incarnate trying to establish this religion. This was, again, a network of different beliefs and practices that came together in the archetype that we call Hinduism. And Sikhism, being founded by Guru Nanak, was actually a response to the invalidated practices of what Hindus and Muslims were doing in the 16th century, when they were focusing more on materialism and injustice and oppression and the inability to see the interconnected nature of all people. And Guru Nanak came into the space and basically showed a middle finger to both the communities and said that, you're not centering your values and your practices on serving others, especially those who are most marginalized, and that needs to change. And that is where, then the framework of Sikhism begins to be established, where there is an established assumption that there is gender equality, that there are specific texts within the Sikh tradition that specify that women are equals across the board, no exceptions, that Sikhism is a religion that is anti-caste, that the only caste that we share is that of being human beings and nothing more or nothing less. And the ability to be able to look for not just justice at a very social level, but at a very economic level, that we at all times should be able to serve and uplift those who are the most, downtrodden, and that we uplift them to equalize them in society, not to keep them in the cycle of poverty and injustice. There are, of course, a whole lot of traditions that even if they carry some similar origin, they can be very different. A couple of those ideas come from things like the celebrations of Holi and Diwali in Hinduism. Uh, in in Hinduism, the celebration of Diwali is seen as the festival of lights, where we're sort of bringing in the idea that good triumphs over evil. That practice within Sikhism is known as Bandi Chhod Divas, because that day being Diwali was actually the celebration of one of the gurus being released from jail. And the story goes that Guru Har Gobind Singh Ji was arrested because he was gaining prominence in the community for the service that he was doing. And when he was put behind bars, um, he was winning over the hearts of many of the folks that were in the prisons, who were noting his kindness, noting his ability to be intrinsically a compassionate person. And it won over even the hearts of the guardsmen, and at a certain point, the same king. Um, the king, noticing the faith of Guru Hargobind, decided that he would let go of the king of the guru, and the guru said, "Well, I cannot leave alone. You have to let me take. You have to free all of these prisoners." So the king decided to come up with a compromise. Whoever held onto the coattails of the guru would be the person that could be freed along with the guru. Um, and long story short, as one of the miracles of the gurus, um, Guru Hargobind Ji, as he was leaving, the prison, managed to create the coattails necessary so that every person that was arrested at the time was also freed. So basically, hundreds of princes and folks that were not supposed to be in jail were freed as well, which is why we call the day Bandi Chhod Divas, which means the day that the prisoners were liberated. And having that aspect sort of fall on a day like Diwali, which is supposed to be a day of triumph over evil, is manifested as a unique story and experience for the Sikh community. Um, and two things that really stand out for Hindus and Sikhs are their divine languages. So both Hinduism and Sikhism use different languages that are out of, common communication, but they are deeply a part of the religious experience. So you have Sanskrit for what is the Vedic tradition, or for a lot of the older scriptures, and you have Gurmukhi, which is a sort of the original script created by one of the gurus to be able to increase literacy in communities, and that's what manifested into languages like Hindi and Punjabi. So we now come to my intersection. And the question that I always get about having, two religious identities is, how do you navigate with both of them? And don't they disagree with each other? And the usual reaction that I get to that is this. And the reason why is because when you ask me how it's possible to practice, two religions in my home, or being comfortable with the two religions that I adhere to in my heart, it's like asking me if I blink my left eye more than my right eye. By practicing the two religions that I do, I'm able to have two unique perspectives on how I connect with the divine. As a part of my Hindu practice, I am very much connected to the feminine divine, and it makes me feel like I'm able to step up and speak up for those who are most marginalized in our communities, many times which are women. And from the Sikh tradition, I'm also reminded of the constant nature of being in service to others is being in service to God, and that society is a reflection of me, and therefore I have a responsibility to it. And I'm able to navigate those with great ease, because what is at the center of both of those traditions and practices for me personally is justice and accountability. Those things don't disagree with each other as core concepts, even if they're manifested or represented in both of those traditions differently. And more importantly, I think it impacts the way that I, as an individual, am able to really traverse through difficult obstacles when I know that I also have to fight for the rights of others and the community context that they come from. Ki jaat sab ek hai pehchan wo, which is a saying from Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the 10th Guru of Sikhism, says to recognize the human race as one. And to be able to strive for that means to make sure that I have the responsibility to strive for the rights and the ability to uplift others at all times. And an interfaith life is less about compromise and more about being aware of all of my life's intersections. Whether I look at my cultural upbringing as an Indian American, whether I look at my dual religious perspective as a Hindu Sikh, whether I look at my sexual orientation, my gender, my socioeconomic status, the color of my skin, the communities that I grew up with, the network of friends that I have, all of that enriches the intersection that I was born into and able to develop over time. And that gives me an opportunity to seek the depth and nuance that makes me the unique person that I am. And it also gives me every opportunity that I can to connect with others because they are part of the same creation that I was meant to be a part of. And I don't mainly, do these kinds of presentations of my identity because there's a difference between doing a presentation to make sure people know that people like me exist with a dual religious identity, but I actually live and breathe this work through a lot of the social justice work that I do on the ground. As a community organizer here locally, I connect with many faith partners in being able to fight on a variety of justice issues and work on numerous service projects. And I also do this work through the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, where I take the opportunity to help communities think about where we need to prioritize our support, where we need to prioritize our ability to educate about communities that are not as well known about. And I do this, most professionally at my work through the United Religions Initiative. So as the regional coordinator of North America, I work with about 90 or 95 interfaith organizations in the United States and Canada. And I get to work as basically the person who fills in the gaps for any of the needs of these communities. So I can be a speaker, a facilitator, a moderator. I can support them with fundraising, technical logistics, vision mapping, or I can do something as simple as be a part of their meetings and give them the moral support that they need to be able to carry on their work, or something as simple as being able to post their work on mass communications and social media. Grassroots interfaith is where my heart has always resided, and seeing that manifest in local, regional, national, and international ways is very much why my interfaith identity, vibes very well with the ability to see communities thrive. There are a myriad of issues that are taking place right now, and they're overlapping each other, more and more every day. And it becomes very clear that at my intersection of the person that I am today, that I always have to remember where I prioritize the need for justice and accountability, not just from myself, but from my community and the other communities that I work with. And that inspiration to do so comes from the depth of my traditions. In the Hindu tradition, there's this idea that if you create a mindset of an us versus them mentality, that you're actually very narrow-minded because this entire universe is your family. And in the Sikh tradition, there's this idea that God is actually a potter and all of creation are different pieces of pottery. Nothing is wrong with the potter and nothing is wrong with the pottery. We were made in these different ways for reasons. But we have opportunities to make sure that the pain and the suffering that people have to endure can be minimalized and can be removed when we remember and remind ourselves of the divinity that exists in all things. So with that, I kind of wrap up my presentation for today, and thank you all at SCIC, all the board of directors, Milia ji, Sarah ji, and the others who are participating on the call today for letting me speak about my perspective and experience. I've put up my email and my social media for folks that are interested in contacting me after the presentation. But now I'm more than happy to turn it over for any questions that people might have.
Great, thanks, Tahil. So who has some questions for Tahil?
I have a few.
By all means.
Okay, one question related to Hinduism, and I think you may have kind of answered it because you were saying it originated with several different aspects, but I was wondering if the multifaceted properties of it currently has it always been that way, or is that something that has developed over time?
It's always been that way. That's why it's very hard to really come up with the idea of who founded Hinduism. It's mainly because thousands of years ago, these were various practices that were already taking place. So the umbrella term of Hinduism is actually kind of inaccurate because that term, is actually pretty new in comparison to the communities that exist on the ground. If you look at it from the linguistic context, you should be looking at it as Sanatan Dharma, or the eternal religion, or as a Vedic philosophy, the philosophy that comes from the Vedas or some of the original scriptures, because those are what are usually the webs of connection between the different schools of philosophy and the practices, not necessarily the umbrella term now that we use called Hinduism.
All right, thank you very much. When it comes to the Sikh, and please forgive my ignorance, it may not even be related to Sikh, but I have an association with the men don't cut their hair. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that?
Sure, I'll be glad to explain. So the non-cutting of hair applies to both men and women who are baptized into the religion, sort of in our version of a full communion. So the idea is that they choose to live in a particular lifestyle that is dedicated to how the community is supposed to be able to sustain itself. And that practice actually comes from all the way back to Guru Nanak, but actually sort of considered an official part of doctrine by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, because it was the idea that it's a natural part of our body. It's something that should remain uncut because it's something that teaches us, that kind of appreciation for the body. So it can't be altered in any way either. So you can't cut your hair, you can't dye it, you can't do stuff like that. But it is supposed to be kept well. So you should wash your hair, you should take care of it. And for many reasons is why people wear turbans actually, because it's the easiest way to be able to actually keep the hair well kept and in an orderly fashion.
Do women wear turbans?
Yes, women do wear turbans as well. They are not required to do so. It is a choice to be able to wear a turban for women. For men who are baptized, it is a requirement, but for women, they can either keep their head keep their hair in a turban. They can keep their head covered generally and create a plait or a ponytail or something like that, or they just keep their hair long in general, and there's no restrictions there.
Okay. And are Sikhs are also vegetarian?
Generally speaking, Sikhs, when they are baptized, are vegetarian, but you will find a lot of folks that do eat meat. There is a general idea that violence towards animals is not a good thing, but in the practice of the community, folks do still eat meat, and there is sort of a complicated ethics behind like what is the use of eating meat if you're not like sustaining yourself. So that can be a little complicated, but if you are baptized, you are supposed to be vegetarian.
Okay, and so then do Sikhs also believe in reincarnation?
Yes, they do. They do believe in a concept of reincarnation, and they believe that the moment that you are connected with God sort of enough, that you will achieve salvation or liberation from the cycle of death, birth, and rebirth.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Of course.
Great questions. Thanks, Cheryl. Anybody else?
How would you summarize what is the purpose of your life
Oh, what is the
in the
purpose
context of
of my
these two faith groups?
I think the purpose of my life is, to show up wherever I'm called for, and to serve those who need help. I've seen that, manifest in a lot of different ways. It's not always the volunteer project that comes to mind when I think of the idea of service. For many folks, it's just offering a listening ear. For some people, it's a smile. For some people, it's a please and a thank you. And being able, I think, to live in that mindset at all times can sometimes be a challenge, because you are not always at 100% every day. But we're actually inspired in the Sikh tradition by Chardikala, or the idea of relentless optimism, that in the face of everything that might happen, that you approach it with a smile on your face. Because when God is with you, you are able to get through it. And I think that smile has gotten me through almost 30 years of my life. And I am extremely grateful for that, because it's given me the strength and the privilege, I think, to be able to help those who are not able to have that smile on their face, who are grieving, who are in pain, and who are suffering at all times. To be able to show up for them means I can help manifest that divine relationship that I have with God by developing that divine relationship with them.
If some, he has some very good materials. If some groups wanted to review the YouTube video and put on some sort of program at a meeting or with their friends or whatever, I wonder how that would work. First of all, when is the YouTube generally posted to the
YouTube?
Yeah, when's it generally posted to YouTube?
I guess that's
James?
a question for James.
For the light.
So usually I'm able to get the videos up within a few days.
Okay.
And, I was just thinking that one thing, Tahil, is you could email me the links to those two videos that you played. If you have if you want to share your presentation, I can put a link to either like a Google Drive, or I can put the links of those two videos, which were very interesting. And yeah, people may definitely be interested in listening to those again. And the first one was very relaxing. Yeah. So I mean,
that is definitely.
I don't say that I don't mean to be dismissive, but it had a very peaceful tone to it, and it was interesting as it starts to repeat. You do find yourself sort of maybe thinking or pondering and stuff, which I'm guessing that's a little bit of a part of it. Hopefully, you're pondering about something positive or that's uplifting. So yeah, we can always add those links to the description for the YouTube.
And to your point, James, like that is the intent of the chanting of the name of God, or the chanting of these mantras, because it's supposed to help center you in a place of a lot of chaos. So we are considered to have very like monkey minds, where we're always jumping from one thought to the other and we're not calming down. If we don't learn to calm down, we're not able to center ourselves. And if we can't center ourselves, the reverberations of what is seen as our faith through the manifestation of these chants can't reverberate and connect to what is the divine. And we're supposed to be able to build very clear relationships out of that. And that's why there are many ways of trying to center yourself. So some people will do it through that meditative contemplative practice. Many people will do it through the more religious or ritualistic practice of yoga. And many people will do it through service. I am very much a person that actually sees my faith best practiced when I'm serving people, because that's where I feel most connected to the divine. I may go to contemplation many times because I do need to center myself, but that's not my go-to practice.
That was kind of my question, is when, where, and with whom do you contemplate? You know, in our tradition, we think of going to a particular location with a particular group or denomination or church. How do you connect with the other people of your faith?
That's a great question, Ronald. So we do have Hindu temples that are sort of dispersed throughout Southern California. A lot of these temples are pretty accessible and open to other communities who are interested in visiting them. The closest one that I have here, because I'm out in the Claremont, Ontario area, is the BAPS Swaminarayan Mandir that's based in Chino Hills, which looks like, it looks like a time portal went back a millennia. It got picked up and the temple just sort of dropped in the middle of Chino Hills. So it kind of stands out from everything around it. But those are the places where we go to offer our prayers to a lot of the altars that are present there for different gods and goddesses. For me personally, I have a personal altar both at home and in my office where I go to sort of contemplate, by myself. I usually carry around some form of meditation beads that I usually am sort of going through either when I'm in the moment of prayer, or I actually do a walking meditation too, where I chant the name of God and I just keep walking, and hopefully I look out for the stop signs or the stoplights so that I don't walk in the middle of the road doing that. And to answer that third question of who, so I switch between many of my my prayers. So I have a lot of mantras and prayers memorized both in Sanskrit and Gurmukhi. So as my heart sort of senses that I need to do a specific kind of prayer, I kind of go into that accordingly. So in the Hindu tradition, I mainly focus on the feminine divine. As I opened the session today, I was chanting prayers to the feminine divine. And the prayer that I prayed from the Sikh tradition that was happening around the temple in the pool of water, I chant that throughout the day as well.
Thank you.
That sort of goes along with there's a scripture that we study in the Book of Mormon, and the person that writes it talks about having a prayer in your heart like the whole entire day, like the idea that you don't, and this is I'm sure a lot of us have this and recognize the value of it, of being able to not just sort of put ourselves in a physical place to pray or meditate or ponder, as we would call it, ponder and pray, but also to be able to be mindful and have a prayer, or be, whether we vocalize it or whether it's internal, like throughout our day. My experience has been that can be have such a great impact on just sort of how we relate to others and sort of our mood. And there's so many great blessings coming from that. So it is great to hear how you sort of put that into practice, because I can see a lot of similarities of at least the things that we're encouraged to do.
Yeah, and we often turn to what we don't think as very obvious ways of being able to go into the practice of prayer. And as a matter of fact, both Hinduism and Sikhism have very heavy emphasis on music as a connection to the divine. And Hinduism has an even older tradition of being able to connect to the divine through dance. So there are specific religious texts that are dedicated to the idea of dance and drama and music as a means of being able to worship, which is really fascinating.
Seems like the Hindus know how to party and have dances and celebrations and happy times.
Been doing it for thousands of years, Donald. We definitely do.
This idea of the role of music in both from a standpoint of worship and also a standpoint of sort of personal, like you said, connectiveness to deity. I was sharing with my mother was visiting a little while ago, a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about certain songs that she heard sung after her father passed away, because he was very active in his church. would always get her to think of him, right? And so a lot of times whenever she hears certain hymns, she'll start crying, and people be like, "What's up?" But I think it's also because that sort of there can be validly so a connection to a person, to our loved ones or something, and that sort of ties with our spiritual experiences as well, and there can be very, very positive experiences. Not every time you're crying it's because you're sad. Sometimes it's because you're happy, right? And so I definitely have an appreciation for the value of that. I wanted to ask, I think you sort of touched on it, this idea of service. And are there, in your community, are there like activities that people will sort of organize and look for opportunities? I know you did mention, I mean, you showed a slide that had like several things that looked like could be service opportunities in addition to maybe advocacy, like you talked about, your passion for justice and sort of helping and helping and serving others. And so how much of that is sort of a role in the communities? And then I just wanted to share that we have this this idea that's really emphasized in our church about ministering. When you were talking to Tahil about sort of looking for opportunities, and I think you have to be mindful of them to serve a person. Sometimes there's like, it's like maybe provide comfort, maybe there's a spiritual aspect to it, that whole combination of sort of like, let's say, temporal and spiritual service is what I have in my mind as I think of as ministering. It's sort of like meeting someone's maybe temporal but also spiritual needs. And so it sounds like you have opportunities to do that in your community. There's opportunities for you to sort of like help and support others, and maybe if it's sometimes mentoring or sharing or teaching. And so I'm interested to hear maybe how you sort of work that into your life as well. So those two aspects of, if you could speak to those two aspects of service, sort of group activities, or even small groups, and then sort of what you do to try to cultivate opportunities to serve others, like individually, one-on-one.
Yeah, so in the Hindu tradition, the emphasis on service is a bit lackluster. And it's because it's very complicated within the paradigm of how Hinduism functions for everyone to feel like all they need to do is service. So the ability to connect with the divine, there are multiple ways to do it. So not everyone is sort of leaning towards this idea of doing service, and therefore in my way of explaining it simplistically right now, it can look pretty selfish. At the same time, I think there is always a yearning or a willingness to be able to serve that I think is becoming more common as of recent. I think particularly with the pandemic, because it's helping people to find community in that way. So for many folks that are seeing themselves as being more individualistic in their practices, may now feel more comfortable being in community because of something like the pandemic, even if that community is virtual. With Sikhism, they have service nailed down to an art, because every chance that they get to serve others, whether as individuals or as community, there's no exceptions to either option. They go out of their way to do it. And the way that that's manifested for me has been really interesting in the past 15 months, because I started my job at the United Religions Initiative when California shut down. That week was my first week at URI. So I had to basically, figure out what this new job was like. So for a lot of communities, it was being able to show up and just listen to what they're going through. For a lot of them, it was just hearing their story and what inspired them to do the work of interfaith cooperation. I remember a number of close friends and colleagues who came to me because of a variety of crises because of faith, because of experiences, because of sickness, because of learning about injustice that was happening on the ground. My service, my seva, was being able to lending a listening ear to them. In very literal ways, it was, you know, fundraising for various communities who were deeply impacted by COVID-19. It was being able to help out at a food pantry and raise money for the regional food bank in the county. It also looked like being able to march on the streets and demonstrate safely and socially distant after the death of George Floyd, and being able to stand up for the Black Lives Matter movement. It looked like a lot of different things, because it's very easy to think that service is a cookie cutter experience, that if you do this, you'll feel fulfilled. When in reality, it's really about like acknowledging what makes you feel like you're serving communities. Is it ministerial? Is it very direct, you know, direct impact kind of stuff? Is it logistical? Is it frontline stuff? Like, it can really look different for different people. So my invitation is to really explore what that means, especially a year after this pandemic, where we really need to be in tune with what is safe and not safe, and how we're out to protect each other, and how something as simple as wearing a mask and socially distancing and vaccinating yourself can be seva. That can be a service.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Well, I'll ask another one. I wanted to ask, so are there Hindu temples and Sikh temples as well?
Mm-hmm.
And you have so if someone is like in either of those religions, part of that community, do you sort of like is attending the temple and sort of like you were meditating, pondering, praying, you know, whatever that form of worship is that something that you do sort of like regularly, once a week, like daily if you live nearby, or once a month? I mean, what's that? How do you sort of work that into? I also have a question about your worship at home, which you made reference to what you know what you have set up at home, but I'm interested sort of what, and I guess you know, I'm not asking sort of like pandemic era, you know, which I know has been curtailed a lot. We have, you know, temples that have been closed and things like that. But so how does that sort of work into your, let's say, you know, practice of in either case?
Yeah. So generally speaking, for the Hindu and the Sikh traditions, there's no stringent rules about attending service or being able to go to temple. So for each person, it's up to them however many times they feel like they're comfortable going. So for some people, it could be once a year. And for some people, it could literally be twice a day, depending on what kind of services are happening. Because we also don't serve in the function of having the Monday through Saturday regular stuff, and then there's a day of congregational services. I think the Sikh community has picked up on that because it's just convenient for the calendar. Aside from what might be, you know, the celebrations for holidays and stuff like that, you technically have in both Hindu and Sikh temples services basically every day. And people can go in and out of those services as it's convenient for them, because there's never a bad time to go. Long story short. And in going to both of the temples, you know, you have to take off your shoes, because it's considered a sacred space, and you're entering a clean space. Therefore, people don't want to tread around in shoes, basically. In the Sikh temple, you have to cover your head. So that head covering can be sort of like a handkerchief that you tie, or a shawl that basically covers your head. And for people that wear a turban already, they're basically good to go.
Oh yeah, so like I think that video and maybe some of the photos, there were folks
Where
that
you
were
saw the
wearing,
people carrying the,
yeah, right.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so that was part of that. Okay.
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
understand.
and many times for both traditions, you also are invited to, you know, wash your feet and stuff because again, you're entering a sacred space. And people can choose how they want to sort of do their prostrations or their practices in front of the altars, either in the Sikh or the Hindu temple. So again, in the Sikh temple, it is just one altar that is dedicated to the scriptures that we offer our obeisance to. And in Hindu temples, it is to the different deities that are sort of established within the temple. And to your question about my personal practice, um, you know, it can look like a lot of different things, I think, based on my needs. I'm usually praying almost all the time. If I'm not talking out loud and I'm working on stuff, there's some prayer going to my head or I'm chanting something. And it gives me an opportunity to try to stay as calm as possible. Oftentimes when I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements, sort of that calmness goes out the window because I'm a very nervous person when it comes to public speaking. But I then, you know, think about, I think about that meditative stance again. And once this call finishes, I go as many times to my small altar to, bow my head and to share gratitude and stuff. I oftentimes light incense and I read from some of the scriptures that I keep close to me. I often have either images or a text that I sort of do that obeisance to. Um, and I have a bunch of playlists on my phone of different prayers and texts that are recited that I love listening to, and that some of them I'm slowly getting memorized in my head because it's a part of my appreciative practice.
Thanks for sharing. And I'm guessing that that like what you have set up in your home and sort of that isn't any different than before the pandemic. That's sort of just what you normally do. Because in our church, it's been really interesting that we've had I'll say the authorization and the ability to conduct certain aspects of our worship in the home.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's always an emphasis on, like you said, like you made reference to, like scripture study and things like that. And for some people, they're able to sort of shift from doing it maybe in a group
Mm-hmm.
to sort of more day to day, or and then some people, for a lot of folks, they can really struggle with that, like incorporating it into their sort of daily practice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a important point you made about the challenge of sort of, if you have this place you go on Saturday or Sunday or things like that, and there's all this stuff that happens, and then what happens during the rest of the week. And so it is, in as much as are able to, a person is able to, and I'm sure most churches and religions have encouraged folks to have it as part of their daily life, but it can be a struggle. So that
Yeah.
is one probably rewarding aspect of your faith and your religions and your practices, that you have it sort of, maybe it's just a natural part of sort of being Sikh or Hindu, is to have that as part of your daily practice. I can see it.
Yeah, making it a part of the daily routine, I think, personally has been very easy because it's very easy to incorporate. I think to offer a counterpoint to that, because we are also many times people of community, not just necessarily religious, but also very cultural and ethnically speaking.
Right.
I think communities have suffered a lot in both Hindu and Sikh spaces
And
because they
social.
haven't gathered in physical community. And unfortunately, due to linguistic barriers, because of technological issues and stuff like that, people have not been able to create digital or virtual community the same way. So that has served as a hindrance for some communities. Some have been able
There
to
are
catch up
definitely
and
some
do services.
some cultures I know, like in our church, we have some cultures that they they're just not interested in utilizing the technology, and it isn't always what you think. I'll give an example. So we have a Samoan congregations, and they don't like technology. They barely send each other emails. but I mean, they hug people, right? They're very one-on-one, and that's a wonderful part of their culture. And then, amongst our different diverse congregations in the South Bay area, I on Sunday I was in a meeting and someone said, "Oh yeah, the Spanish-speaking ward or congregation, oh, they had people like, on Zoom that were sharing, during their service and all kind of stuff, and everyone else, oh, we haven't gotten that working in this building or that building." And so it isn't, you can't always make assumptions that just because certain cultures are less likely to pick it up or more old-fashioned or whatever, because that's not always the case. Some of them are very adaptive, and because it sort of out of necessity, because they really they really need as part of their culture that connectedness. So they really make a lot out of it. So thanks for sharing that. That's really nice. Hey, Ron, did you have a question? I saw your hand went up earlier.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I was thinking of my grandparents' era when my dad's mother was Episcopalian, and that was really extraordinary from the others that were other forms of Protestantism, and certainly didn't talk to Catholics until one of my uncles married one. And so I had cousins that were Catholic, and I had cousins that were Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I grew up in a context of growing up in West LA where I wasn't Jewish and I wasn't Catholic. I was a minority, and today, so I'm wondering, how is it for someone like you, who's not a Christian or a Jew, or and do you face a lot of discrimination? Do your people face the possibilities of anger and violence, and how are you dealing with it?
Thank you for that question, Ron. And as a matter of fact, out of sheer convenience, I am also from West Los Angeles, from Culver City in particular.
Okay.
So I can deeply relate to that question. It was interesting because growing up in West LA, in Culver City and the Palms neighborhood, I didn't actually have that much of a problem because the diversity that was around made it very comfortable to be
Right.
able to be among people of difference. So it didn't feel like we needed to stick out in a different way, or that we had to feel hindered because of those differences. Starting from going to, Palms Elementary School and shifting to Shernock or Braddock, though all the schools were super diverse, so we never really had those conversations come up. I actually didn't experience that kind of stuff until I moved to the Inland Empire where I'm at now, where being in white suburbs kind of made it very clear that people were staring you in the face for being so different. And I had exchanges with a number of different people that I had a person scream at me from the truck to tell me that I'm an abomination. I've had people avoid walking on the same sidewalk with my parents. I've had people ask my mom where the dot on her head is, where these are very, very random, occurrences. They are not things that we expect. They're not things that hinder us from being able to live our lives. But we have to have a sense of preparedness for those kinds of things and how we respond. If I was my mother, I might jump on the person and attack them. So I sometimes have to hold her back. If I'm my dad, he might try to laugh it up and take it as a joke. And if I try to deal with it, I try to open the doors to be like, what was the reason for saying that? What do you think I am exactly? And I think a lot of these kinds of difficult exchanges happen when, well-meaning people across the board, some who are not, trying to discriminate or trying to be racist or trying to cause controversy, try to ask questions. And instead of letting people answer the questions, they fill in the blank for them. So if someone asks me, what are some of your beliefs in Hinduism? And someone tells me, well, isn't it true that you believe that da 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 da? When you create a conversation or a space where you're answering the question for me, you're building a defense that doesn't allow me to answer the question. So I always invite people to remember that, if it's genuinely about you learning and not trying to create a space for assuming things or pushing your prejudgments on people because that's how you perceive them, the better chance you'll actually have in expanding your understanding about the community and the individuals that you interact with.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny because I think that I wonder if how many of us have caught that or have had that happen where someone says, "Oh, like for members of my church, it's like, oh, so how many wives do you have?" Right? It's the same kind of thing, right? And rather than asking the question about the topic, and which opens it up for you to share, it's like, oh, don't you believe this, or don't you do this, or don't you, and so it creates a wall, so that's really a great lesson, I think, about, sort of interfaith community, sort of like learning from each other, right? So
Exactly.
thanks for sharing it that way. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
I wanted to ask another question. So in the video with the Sikh folks, they went into that place, like a temple or whatever that place was, and then those young men were like in the water. And so can you share with us, what is that practice? It was sort of like, I'll say a little bit like a baptism type of thing, but it was some practice where they were in the water and sort of, dunking of a sort. Can you share what that what's sort of associated with the meaning and the purpose of that practice?
Sure, absolutely. So that's known as a talab, or basically a pool, which is kind of, it can be in some ways seen as a baptismal font. And the reason why is because I had mentioned that, at many times as you're entering either temple, you usually find an opportunity to wash your hands and your feet before you enter a sacred space. So that baptismal font, or that pool, is an opportunity for people to do those basic things. Some people will just wash their hands and wash their feet, and some people will take complete ablutions just to sort of purify themselves and clean themselves before they enter the sacred space.
I noticed when they walked in, it looked like they were walking through like an area with water, like at the entrance, like their feet were in, it was like really shallow, and then people were taking the water and they were putting it on their head, or so there's sort of, those are all just different forms of that sort of practice.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Exactly.
And it sounds like what I'm hearing is it's like the idea of sort of being cleansed, or I mean, so obviously there's got to be a lot going on inside as well as just what the outer experience is. So
yeah,
that's
exactly.
really nice.
And thankfully, because of technology in particular, there are thousands of people that go to that temple that you saw. The Golden Temple in Amritsar, India, is one of the most visited, holy shrines for Sikhs, but it's also one of the busiest religious sacred spaces in the world, because that's a place where you have a lot of human foot traffic. And you see people going in like the hundreds into this holy water, and you're like, oh my God, they're all sharing these germs. What is going on? And it's interesting because actually there is a whole purification system that's running 24/7 in that water, which they had to build that technology over time because they had that much traffic. And that's also the same temple that is considered one of the largest free kitchens in the world. On average, every day they feed 100,000 people with free meals up to their heart's content. And on special holidays and occasions, the numbers can double or even triple.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I wanted to mention or ask about, I guess, or share, in our temples, we have an ordinance that's washing and anointings, and it is different than a baptism, in that it's intended to sort of like, prepare the person receiving that ordinance for, like, to prepare them spiritually to have a more meaningful, powerful, significant spiritual experience with some of the things that happen like after that. So this notion of being able to you know, it's not just the idea of you know, baptism to me is sort of washing your own sins away, or sort of symbolic of that, but the idea that you can wash yourself from the effects of the negative things or the bad experiences in the world, to prepare yourself to, you know, to be spiritually nourished or uplifted. It sounds like that's part of it too, because I think you could tell from that video. I mean, they were very mindful of, you know, going through that process to, you know, gain the unique, I'll say, spiritual experience that comes from worship in that type of place, right?
Exactly.
Which is, you know, it's a different experience than in your home, you know, not that it's not great in your
Right.
home, but it's so that was those are some of the thoughts I had when I was, you know, watching that. I really could appreciate and resonate with that. So cool.
Yeah, and in the Hindu tradition, there is very much that same kind of ablution practice as well. I think, as you were saying, to sanctify yourself, to wipe away your sins, to keep away the negativity and bring positivity towards you. Most commonly in the Hindu tradition, that those ablutions are done in the Ganga, or the sacred river Ganges, where many folks consider that to be the manifestation of a goddess, who is the one that literally is removing your sins as you dip yourself into the water.
Yeah, but I like what you said. You use the word sanctify, which has more than just, like I said, getting rid of your own baggage. It also, you know, there's the effect of whatever we've experienced or whatever's out in the world, so to speak, and washing that away and being so that you really have a clean slate, right? And that notion of sort of, you know, the you know, sort of helping yourself from the effects of what others have done to you, right? Or what the world has done to you. Sometimes just random, you know. I mean, you know, rains on, you know, when it rains, but sort of healing. There's a healing aspect to it as well. So I could see that in that. So that's really pretty cool. Thanks.
Is there some sort of umbrella organization in Southern California or California or the US that is, you know, under which you're organized, or it's sort of a loose organization, isn't it?
That's a great question, Donald. For the Sikh community, there are several national organizations that help for communities to, you know, advocate for themselves, to be able to educate and stuff like that. One is the Sikh Coalition. The Sikh Coalition has been around for about 15-20 years now, and they've been really dedicated to that kind of advocacy and education efforts. There's another called SALDEF, which is the Sikh American Legal Educational something fund. I can't even remember. There are too many letters. That does very similar work. And there's one known as Khalsa Aid. Khalsa Aid is a very direct service oriented organization that is inspired by a coalition of different temples and communities dedicated to just serving people, whether it's, you know, food or housing or providing PPE or all of that kind of stuff. Sikhs gather in that way. For the Hindu community, I think, is a bit more disorienting on average than the Sikh community, because every temple is sort of on its own, kind of doing its own thing. So you do have, you know, national organizations that try to gather and help out in that process. You have the North American Hindu Temple Federation. You have the Hindu American Foundation. You have Sadhana, a coalition of progressive Hindus, for which I'm on their board. And you have others that are trying to help create a unifying voice, which again is really difficult because that is the nature of the Hindu American community. It is very diverse and it is very spread out and very opinionated across the spectrum.
Yeah. What is the group you're involved in? I can hear you.
Sadhana, it's spelled SADHANA. They're a group of progressive Hindus who actually look at emphasizing social justice, accountability, and service through the Hindu lens, and really actually working towards, the ability of Hindus to be able to be, more represented, but also having Hindus show up in various spaces for justice work, whether it's immigration, economic justice, COVID-19 pandemic relief, fighting against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and being able to say that there are voices there that are supporting those causes.
Okay. These are all sort of outward facing organizations, but like the Catholics, have organizations up to the Pope, but you don't have anything like that at all.
No.
There's no single place to go for, what is Hinduism, it sounds like.
Right, exactly. For Hindus, there is no concept like that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if there is going to be a concept like that, because it is just way too complicated to try to get 1 billion people to agree on something. For the Sikh community, we do have what are known as Gurdwara Prabandhak committees. So there are different major institutions that are able to deal with the legalistic or administrative sides of how temples can come to decisions in India. Some have them in the US and stuff like that. So some temples have their own boards. But there's also the Akal Takht, which is actually the only spiritual center for the entire Sikh community that's able to talk about a lot of these different things. Again, the community is sort of invited to remember that a lot of this is based on personal interpretation. So you don't have to turn to a specific body of hierarchy to be able to make those decisions. But there is actually a randomly occurring sort of, what I could call a conference or a synod, that's called the Sarbat Khalsa. And that's where literally as many Sikhs as possible across the board come together to talk about some important things. And they happen really sporadically, because depending on the needs of the community or the urgency of an issue that might be coming up. So Sarbat Khalsa can be organized, and you will have, hundreds of thousands of people come together in India, in the US, and around the world to be able to be like, okay, we have to talk about something.
Wow.
Tahil, thank you so much for your presentation tonight. It's absolutely excellent, but I expected nonetheless from you. You've mentioned several times the social justice issues, and I work a great deal with the Vedanta Society, as you know, but they seem to have the aspect that they don't take stances on social justice issues.
Right.
Would it be the same for priests in the Brahmins in Hindu temples and such? Would they take stances on social justice issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, Father Alexei. It really depends. I think usually the folks that are priests or in the clergy will not usually take political stances. And it's because I think the nature of, getting involved in politics is inherently toxic. And for, the priestly class, they say we're not going to associate ourselves with that. But unfortunately, in the several decades of the 20th century, and I think searching into a deeper history, there is actually a deeply political nature to religion within Hinduism, that, not saying something is saying something.
Yes, exactly.
And so it makes it very complicated. And I think, in some of the work that I'm doing in progressive faith or interfaith spaces, there is a call for, Hindus and particularly Hindu clergy who are actually going out of their way to now speak up about political issues that are taking place. And these are some, major institutions in India to, communities here in the United States or priests in the United States who are, supporting, affirming, and performing gay marriages, who are, going out of their way to stand up against climate change and global warming, who have been, very avid about fighting for racial justice and against police brutality and white supremacy. And I think it's because it's the American taste of how that might be happening here in the United States But India is going through a similar situation too, because of the nationalist government
Mm.
and its ability to politicize religion, and whoever is, taking that as the bait, versus a lot of the folks that are on the ground who are like, that's not how Hinduism works for me, and they're actually pushing back, and they're saying that whatever that is not the Hinduism that we want, and it's actually causing a bit of a reckoning as to what the future and relevance of Hinduism is going to look like.
Thank you.
Tahil, I wanted to ask a question. You showed us that great picture of you and your parents, and that so the first question is like a simple one, and then the second one is a little more maybe into it. But so did your, as you're growing up, what was your parents' attitude towards sort of, I guess I'll say it this way. I think a lot of times you see someone in an interfaith family, the parents are like, okay, well, the kids can choose, right? But it's a choice between A or B, right? It's not A and B. And so I'm curious to know. I would expect and maybe not your parents. How supportive were they of you, or even are of you today? And how does it? Do they like? What have you seen in sort of your family that's just aside from just differences and similarities between the religions? Are there examples that you've seen where your parents have come together and they sort of like, I guess, can appreciate maybe the ideas or the practices, or from their spouse's religion? I'm fascinated as to how that's played out, because you clearly have such a comfort and identity with both, and I can see how I would hope and expect that your parents are like really appreciate that in you a lot, because and then also how that interplays with their relationship as well.
Absolutely, that's a great question, James. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. My parents have from the beginning been very open about my interest, which was, I think, more than the average 5 or 6 year old in religion and spirituality, to be able to just like roam freely and learn from whoever I pleased, because they were very much about like, you're learning about why people are different, and that is completely acceptable. Go for it. And in as much as my parents were also, very busy trying to like take care of the home and stuff like that, I also spent a lot of time with a babysitter who was from Mexico and who was deeply Catholic, whose intention was to never convert me, but she provided me exposure to a Mexican Catholicism that I grew up with, in conjunction with my Hindu and Sikh attitudes, which gives me a lot to work with. But it was never seen from the lens of something detrimental. It was always about learning. My parents' closest friends were all from Pakistan, who practiced, a couple different types of Islam. I got exposed to a lot of, Islamic denominations and ways of prayer and practices that were very South Asian and familiar culturally, even though they were very different religiously. And that was all happening at the age of 5. So they were very open about that kind of exposure, because they knew how enriching that was, and how actually, for my father's case in particular, how different that was from how things were at home, because there was a harboring of Islamophobic sentiments on many occasions, because they lived in a reality following the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. So those are historic grudges. And those are much harder to be able to break down. And I think, with the, in the last decade at the very least, much of the post 9/11 rhetoric, towards the Muslim community, towards other minority communities in the United States, but also in the context of India, has taken a really big shift. So I have to speak to a lot of my family members, or like call them out when they're saying blatantly like misinforming or rude things about other communities, and I have to stop them in their tracks. And they will go out of their way to tell my parents that I need to know my place. And that's when I double down and I'm like, no, 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 you need to know your place, because I actually inform myself about, the value of diversity and inclusion. And it sort of keeps me in a weird position when I have family members that are very discriminatory, that use their caste as an opportunity to put down others, that use their faith to be able to say that they're better or that others are worse. And I want to continue to live as an antithesis to that, because that's how my parents raised me, because they gave me an appreciative outlook to the world and its diversity, not a competitive or a destructive one.
Yeah, I have a very dear friend from graduate school that's from Pakistan, is Ahmadi, and lots of very different practices,
Right.
but many similarities. And we spent a lot of time together when in that phase of my life. Was a very dear friend, and he had an arranged marriage, and his brother was married to his wife's sister, and I've known them for years, and just how happy they are, and just how it works for them. So it isn't always about, oh, it's different, so there's something wrong with it. For many people, it really, I mean, these kind of practices that are unusual, for some, it works great, and it really is a positive and a blessing to them. And then it's interesting you talk about the attitudes. My brother-in-law was in Pakistan when he's in active duty in the army, and would go to a home and worship with other members of our church that were Pakistani, and did it in secret, because there was such a risk of persecution and stuff. And so it's really so important to just know that it's the same all around the world. I mean, it always comes down to, like we've talked earlier, and like you talked, Tahil, about being open to just ask the question, learn about another person, and get to know them, and have love and respect, right? I mean, if you have love and respect, then a lot of these kinds of things can be mitigated. And so anyway, that's
Yeah,
really
and
great.
I think to the points of, I think, love and respect, I think that's how you first invite people in, but then you also have to be candid and responsible, because I think in interfaith spaces often struggle with this idea that, like, oh, since you're including everyone in the space and you don't want to, like, cause controversy, quote unquote, that we're just not going to talk about anything difficult. And the problem with that is you're actually inherently pushing out the justice that we're all supposed to strive for together, which is why we call God into an interfaith space just as much as we do any of our individual traditions. So it's very
for
important
sure.
to be uncomfortable and talk about the difficult things too. And remember that actually they're not difficult conversations, they're necessary conversations. So to really destigmatize the idea that just because they make us uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. It means we need to have them in a way that's productive.
Yeah, and I've seen that there's sort of two aspects to that. One is the willingness to be able to talk about the similarities and also the differences in our religion, because it does, it can help us have a different perspective. Whether we adhere to it or not, we could still benefit from understanding a different perspective on any aspect of religion, on our relationship with God or deity, or as the case may be. And so being open to that is so valuable. And the other aspect is that can be difficult, is to understand that all of our views on the ills of society and the solutions are different. It can be different as well, and so it's that I think is actually probably more challenging, because outside of the religious, I'll say, interfaith community, politicians generally want to divide people. I mean, we see that a lot, right? And so sometimes I think we're all subjected. We can bring that into our relationship with those in the interfaith community, and and we do see maybe sort of what is, what can bring justice to others, what can serve others, what can, help others, and see that a little differently. And those can be difficult conversations to have. And sometimes you need a forum maybe to do that. So we have this forum here to talk about, to understand the similarities and differences, even if we don't, by learning and sharing about sort of our religion and our practice and stuff like that. We don't always have the forum to see all the different points of view about social issues and how to approach those,
Right.
so
Understood.
that, I really appreciate the challenges that you have in the roles that you have and have sort of incorporated as part of your life and in your profession. They're very difficult, they're to surmount. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions? I really appreciate everyone's questions. And see, Tahil, I told you 2 hours goes by pretty quick when we have the chance to learn and to share and to ask questions. So thank you so much for your willingness and all the efforts that you made to prepare and give a great presentation. And hopefully, I echo everyone just as just the wonderful things that I was able to learn from you, being willing to share and put yourself out there to share about your unique beliefs and practices and sort of how they bless your lives. So we'll leave you to close for us with whatever you would like to choose to, and then we'll be dismissed for this month. And I will say a few words about after that about our next Religion 101 we have planned. But I'll turn it over to you, Tahil, one last time.
Sure. I'll sort of wrap things up with what we call the Shanti Mantra, which calls upon the different aspects of how we understand peace in different parts of the world, within ourselves, between us, and all around us. So I'll chant that in Sanskrit to sort of close the space. Om Dhyoh Shantirantariksha Shantihi Prithvi Shantirapa Shanti Poshadhaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantirvishve Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvatva Shantihi Shantirebha Shantihi Samam Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Shri Shubham Bhavatu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just share. Our next Religion 101 will be in June on the 24th. That's the fourth Thursday. And it will be Dr. Ray Zimmerman, who's a member of the Baha'i community in Orange County, and he's going to talk about the Baha'i faith. So if you don't get my email, let me know and put your email in the chat. But I think everyone that attended here will get it, and look forward to that. And so we have that. And then in July, we have a member of the Sikh community that's going to speak as well. So looking forward to that. So, and then we've got August, September, October is booked as well. So we've got a lot of great speakers and wonderful topics to look forward to. So thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great evening. We'll see you next month. Bye now.
Thank you.